Before we get started with this video, I want to once again ask that you check out the official DMuted merch store, dmuted-shop-fourthwall.com. Every design was made by yours truly, and we have some brand new merch incorporating some very cute sleepy designs, featuring the character Muted as well as Bobo and Loudmouth. We also have a new pin set for those who want a smaller way to show your support. Anyway, on with the video. My most popular video of all time is a video where I cover Battington's Five Nights at Freddy's VHS series. It just passed 900k views recently, and I'd be really excited if we could get it past 1 million down the line. Maybe before the end of this year? Anyway, today I finally decided to make a follow-up video. I've covered many other channels before and after with many series, FNaF or otherwise, being discussed and thoroughly analyzed. But I can safely say that at the end of the day, I always knew I had to talk about Battington again. And while I have mulled over making a Harmony and Horror analysis, that one's definitely farther down the pipeline. Instead, we're talking about his most recent, and in my opinion, his best Five Nights at Freddy's VHS video. It's a video I'm sure you've seen others react to, or may have had pop up in your own feed from time to time, The Case of Edward Morris. But before we talk about this new video, I think we're due for a recap. So, what is Battington's Five Nights at Freddy's VHS? Well, the project had started out as fan-made recreations of the FNaF VHS series created by a certain someone who will not be named. They did something bad, alright? This series of remade videos continued up until a branching point that we're gonna call an oopsie daisy. It's actually been really funny looking back on this, knowing the original series creator, who actively told Battington that they didn't want to see Battington remake any more of their videos, was going full Dormitibus behind the scenes. Anyway, after this point, Battington stopped remaking the original series and instead took the series in its own unique direction. And I have to admit, this is where the quality went way up. Maybe it's the fact that Battington was no longer working within the limits of the original series, or maybe it's just because they were becoming a better animator and filmmaker. But Battington's more original FNaF VHS content was a big hit with me and with his audience. However, with a couple small videos here and there that are more so tangentially FNaF related, Battington had not been as active with the series as he once was. However, it wasn't totally at rest. With little warning, Battington released The Case of Edward Morris, the next video in the FNaF VHS series, and a pretty much universal favorite. I immediately noticed the increase in production quality from the moment this video started. While most of Battington's FNaF catalog relies on very simple motion or even completely still shots, this video is a found footage piece with camera movements as accurate as Spectre animations, and scares and storytelling that rival Reach animations, both of whom I've also covered previously on the channel. I know I'm really setting this video up here, but it's important that you understand just how much this video improved not just on Battington's work, but on the work of pretty much everyone in the sphere. And I think that's overall a good thing. As FNaF VHS and analog horror in general evolves, seeing more and more effort put into these videos is going to reinvigorate the genre. I'm especially a fan of the found footage concept a lot of creators are leaning towards now, as opposed to the more traditional analog horror of the Mandela Catalog Episode 1, for example. Previously, the story involved a number of tapes, each fixating on a different member of the core 5 animatronics from the first game. These included training tapes, a pre-show, some tapes involving the puppet, and everyone's favorite non-existent video. The ultimate plot surrounding these tapes were about the spirits reaching out to the viewer, who was supposedly meant to be Michael Afton. The puppet guided Michael to this place, and guided him to find the tapes which had been stuffed inside the various mascot heads. In non-existent video, which basically serves as the end of Season 1, Michael finds out his father is Springtrap and that he's still out there, setting up the events of FNaF 3. The next 2 episodes include Late One Night at Fazbear's Frights and Motion Detected in Cam_4, which differ vastly from the original set of tapes. The first of the 2 focuses on Springtrap being held as an active attraction at Fazbear's Frights, while the other takes place in the FNaF 2 location and as Toy Bonnie reacting to Afton having somehow snuck in. Although these 2 videos are very apart in terms of story and even timeline placement in comparison to the previous videos, these 2 are still, in my opinion, the best made in the series. Until today's video anyway. Although non-existent video is still probably the definitive best Battington video, these other, shorter videos demonstrated just how far Battington had come since he began making these videos. They're less jump scare oriented, and much of the horror instead comes from feelings of dread and terror, rather than jump scares or funny loud noises. I mean, those are still present, but they're actually better set up now and usually coincide with those dreadful moments. Enough stalling, I think now it's time I actually start talking about this short, 8-minute animation. Alright, so since much of the story is not revealed until the very end of the video, I'm going to give you, the viewer, a courtesy I rarely give. I'm going to explain the framing device before the story would otherwise naturally reveal it. This video is footage taken by Edward Morris, a 15-year-old who was dared to stay overnight in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, using it as an opportunity to prove whether or not the place was actually haunted. As for setting, that's a bit harder to pin down, but I believe this is meant to be the FNaF 2 location, given that we see the withered vintage animatronics, and Spring Bonnie, or as he's called in this universe, Bonnie Bun, is still a recognizably rabbit-shaped suit and not a disgusting corpse disguise yet. This places the video, if Battington is abiding by the basic FNaF lore, in 1987. Since we don't know when the other videos are meant to take place necessarily, other than they follow the original FNaF VHS story, we can presume that this is taking place before the majority of the events in the first set of videos, and before Afton would die in the Springlocks. Maybe. It's a little harder to keep track of than the other series, since Battington uses his own style of animatronics rather than using established ones like most other VHS series do. The video begins with a blue gradient warning screen before we cut to handheld camera footage of someone walking towards this gated doorway. Edward decides to peer around the place with a camera, unable to make out much on the right. On the left though was something else. A lamp, a computer terminal, and Bonnie sitting on a desk. This cuts and we fade into a photo Edward takes, one of several that we'll be seeing more of later, showing the door wide open. Now that Edward's inside, he takes a good look around, shining his flashlight on the Bonnie animatronic sitting on the desk. He's badly damaged, as if he had been taken apart, notably missing one of his arms. In that moment, Edward decides to instead approach the 3 other animatronics on the other side of the room, shining his light at them and going over them slowly. Freddy, Chica, and Foxy all bearing damage similar to their withered counterparts from the second game, especially Chica with a hyperextended jaw and arms that seem stuck in an outward pose. Edward takes another picture, this one more blurry, featuring these 3 animatronics standing together. Edward then gets closer and fixates specifically on pushing the camera in on Chica. However, he bumps into Freddy, and whether accidentally or on purpose, he shoves Freddy aside, toppling him over with a loud crash. An electric surge happens behind Freddy through the shelves, barely illuminating a set of bent rabbit ears. Whether this is Bonnie or someone else, I don't really know in this instance, but it seems to be where Bonnie was sitting. Edward takes in the power outage and aims his camera towards the door, as if he was feeling nervous and wanted to get out. But before he goes, he decides to take another picture. This one of Freddy toppled over on the shelves. But he's not the only thing in this picture. Peering over the shelves, you can just barely make it out. A human face grinning widely back at the camera. Edward isn't alone. He hasn't been since the beginning. We cut to Edward slamming the door shut and the chain links rattling around. He decides to peer around again, but this time he can't make out the Bonnie animatronic in the dark, and for good reason. He takes a step back and we hear this horrible warbling of what sounds like a mechanical roar. The camera feed starts to break up, and through the static we can see Bonnie standing behind Edward. Only he's not facing Edward. He's instead pointing with one arm outstretched down one of the 4 halls that connect in this little center. Edward approaches, the feed breaking down further and further until eventually the warbling stops. The camera feed clears up and Edward takes a peek around the animatronic. It can be noticed here that Bonnie's eyes are glowing bright red. In this instant, we hear him speak in a canned voice the word stranger. He repeats it while Edward peeks around him, with the word eventually breaking down and growing lower, and then a song begins. It's a creepy song, and one that you may be familiar with. It's a rendition of Ave Maria, played on these strange, warping synth instruments. It's here that Edward finally lifts his flashlight down the hall Bonnie was pointing down, and there he stands. In his bright yellow fur and purple vest, it's Bonnie Bun. The camera cuts, and then cuts back to Edward now sprinting down the hall away from Bonnie Bun, while the song plays continually, warped in the background, and flashes of withered Freddy begin to appear on screen, twitching and vibrating. Edward runs through the arcade, past Skee-Ball, pointing the camera behind him to show that Bonnie Bun is still silhouetted against the doorway. Now we see Chica twitching in the same way as Freddy before we cut back to the camera, now pressed up between 2 arcade cabinets. Bonnie Bun, hunched over, sprints by, and we cut to Foxy dancing the same dance as his friends. Our final shot from Edward's camera has it cracked, lying on the floor pointing at the entrance. Bonnie Bun is standing just ahead of it, and Edward, trying as he may, is pounding on the glass. Through the music now we can hear Edward screaming the words "Help! Help me!" During this shot, we also get intermittent cuts of Bonnie Bun swiping at Edward in the camera, maybe reenacting the moment when the camera was dropped on the ground. I'm not sure, but still some really nice shots. But the crazed music stops when the camera rests on Bonnie. Bonnie now sits alone, without his face. It had been removed. Unlike the others, he's not twitching, only sitting, as though he were upset with how things turned out. And he gives us a message. Okay, I'll do my best ghostly narrator voice for this one. We shed our hidden smiles. It's here that Ave Maria begins playing again, only much slower and on less warped instruments. A new fawn has come to play. Our cries were not heard. The fawn could not stay. No empty box to shelter him. No silver eyes to see through. Run, little fawn, before all hope disappears. Run, little fawn, the golden hair is here. At this line, the room becomes dark and we see only the glow of Bonnie's eyes, before they too cut out. We fade back into blue, as was the warning at the beginning. It's here we find out about Edward's ultimate fate, and although I appreciate Battington's tasteful and effective censoring of a corpse, I'm gonna go ahead and censor the whole thing so I don't risk my ass. We find out that Edward is Deadward, and his body had been found in a ventilation system at Freddy's after customers complained of an acrid smell. This moment basically describes what I had told you at the beginning of this segment, but it also adds some new details I thought were juicy enough to leave for the end. Namely, Fazbear Entertainment claimed no responsibility over the man in the yellow bunny suit that was seen on Edward's camera, which had been recovered. The PSA ends with a warning about staying away from places you shouldn't be, especially alone. And this video closes on a warning against this man right here. And that's the case of Edward Morris, a short, understandable, but chilling addition to Battington's long lineup of FNaF VHS videos. But I've already told you how I think it stacks up. I think it's his best yet. But like any good analog horror, there's always a plot beneath the plot kind of setup. This is something Battington has done before in other videos, but little details littered throughout actually clue us in on a story that's not told through the lens of Edward Morris. For starters, I think it's a big red flag that so many lights were on in a pizzeria that was supposedly closed for the night, especially that lamp and computer and what seemed to be parts in service. This to me makes it seem like the killer was already here, working on the Bonnie animatronic, or more accurately, torturing him. The oddest difference between the beginning and the ending of this tape is definitely Bonnie, but from what I interpret from his poem, as well as the before and after, it seems likely that Bonnie's face was removed by Afton as punishment, as he seems to be here to torture the robots. This is why Bonnie is so relaxed compared to the others. While they're freaking out, he's weakened, unable to fight back, and only tells his poem about what they were trying to do. This poem tells us so much about what actually happened in this video. First of all, it makes it clear that Edward was not supposed to be here, and Afton didn't really plan on anyone being there either. After all, according to Bonnie, there were no empty boxes for him to hide in, or silver eyes to look through. There were no animatronics there that Edward could have inhabited. It's because of this that Bonnie wanted him to just leave, and tried to warn the stranger that the killer, Afton, was still there. I think what makes this more chilling to me is the question of what if there was another suit? Would Edward have been stuffed inside of it? And if he was going to be stuffed, would Bonnie have tried to help him at all? Or would he have tried to hurt him? I'm not sure, but that's the vibe I'm getting here. Ultimately, I think what this plot can be summed up to is a wrong place, wrong time kind of scenario. Edward saw more than he was supposed to, and because of that, he had to die. But Afton, not knowing what to do with a lack of suits, decided to stuff him in the vents. Depending again on how closely Battington is following the original lore, this could be the reason the FNAF 2 location comes under the investigation that eventually gets the place closed down in the main game. Ultimately, with its forward plot revolving around a teenager on the run from Freaky Rabbit Man, and its hidden plot telling us why he shouldn't have been there, I feel like this is overall an incredible analog horror video to come out of Battington. By the way, I feel like I should probably say this. Battington has made the original vintage models absolutely free for download and use. And who knows, maybe I'll use one in a thumbnail someday. Overall, the feeling of this video is one of a brand new, forward-thinking filmmaking style for the FNAF VHS series. Although, as I said last time, Battington seems to want to take somewhat of a step back away from FNaF, I really do have to encourage he keeps telling the story. He's getting a hell of a lot better at it. And I guess that wraps up our sort of check-in on one of my favorite content creators in the FNaF sphere. I will be linking the video in the description, but I'll also be linking some of Battington's other projects because they do deserve attention. I really hope you check those out. Anyway, that's all out of me. Be sure to subscribe, and peace.